If we look at other research plots, you see the same thing, and I could have shown you dozens of pictures of this sort of thing in Africa and elsewhere. Partial rest, total rest. One side a research plot, totally rested, the other side overgrazing of plants, and you look at the two sides, look at the amount of bare soil, it's about the same. So we now realize that total rest and partial rest are very adverse in seasonal rainfall grasslands, and they are the most damaging influence, way more than the overgrazing of plants, which we've been obsessed with for thousands of years. Now, if we're going to put it right, we're a tool-using animal, and many of us in our deliberations and discussions, or if you just talk to people and say, how many tools are available to humans? You'd list thousands, right? So when we put 2,000 scientists through training in the early 80s, I got them to list every single tool they ever used in their profession, whatever it was, in their home, farms, businesses, and we broke them down into headings. And we have to know what tools we have available, because all the creativity in the world, all the money in the world, all the labor in the world, you cannot even drink water without going and putting your mouth to the river or scooping it up in your hand. The moment I drink that, I'm using technology, the glass. So we cannot do anything without picking up a tool. Now, when we list the tools available to us to begin addressing the agricultural problem, what are they? We have the tool of technology. We've had that for about 1 million years. It began with sticks and stones, then we chipped the stones, we could sharpen the sticks, and we could not influence our environment any more than any other tool-using animal. Then somewhere around about towards the 1 million years ago, we first got the tool of fire. Then we could melt the stones and go into the Bronze Age, the Copper Age, the Iron Age, and develop the technology we have today. Everything in this room. Computer I'm using, the hearing aids I'm using, whole damn lot. Okay, but we had that ability to advance our technology and begin influencing the environment, etc. Then, what other tools have we had? For 99% of human existence, no other tools. Technology and fire. About 10, 15,000 years ago, we developed the idea of another tool. That would have happened sometime after we domesticated plants and animals. It would have started either with pastoralists or farmers, crop farmers, beginning to rest the land. So you can train in any university in the world today, and to address climate change, agriculture, all of these problems, those are the three main tools: technology, rest, or fire. And the only other tool we ever developed that we can discover was small living organisms, again about 10,000 or so years ago, to make cheese and wine. And now genetic engineering, but not to manage our environment at large. So looking at those tools, you can see why we've used fire as much as we have. And we justified that, as I mentioned in the TED talk, because it did remove that top hamper of oxidizing material, and it kept plants alive. But it also exposed soil and polluted the environment. All right, so when we look at the three tools we have, no technology, even imaginable, will ever replace the role that animals play in grasslands with their digestive gut, their hooves, and everything else. On the scale and with the frequency needed, it's inconceivable that even imaginable technology could do it or is needed. When we look at fire, it's a major cause of climate change, desertification. And when we look at resting the environment, it's the #1 cause of desertification. All counterintuitive, all very simple to understand once we could see it. It took years of trying to unravel it. And again, as I pointed out in the TED talk, what we had missed was that these seasonal rainfall environments were where the large herding animals came from and their pack hunting predators. So you get big predators in the tropical forests, the permanently green areas I showed, tiger, jaguar, but you don't get packs of tigers. You don't get packs of jaguar. Why? Because they don't eat insects. And insects are the main herbivores. But when you get into the seasonal grassland, the main herbivores start to be large mammals. And they had the pack hunting predators. And the pack hunter was the key to it. Because without the pack hunter, desertification occurs. Why? Because of overresting the land. What prevented the land overresting was the herding animals getting into bunches to try to deal with the pack hunting. Because the only defense they had was be small, secretive, non-herding, very speedy, be able to outrun the pack hunters or get into bunches. And the females of many of the species don't have horns. The males have horns, but they're a bit like cowboy belt buckles and big hats. They're to charm each other, not to defend females. So the females learned to get into a big herd. That was one thing. The bigger the herd, the safer we are, and drop all your babies quickly. If you can drop them all in a month, and 20% get eaten by the wild dogs, the hyenas, the cheetahs, the lions, leopards, 80% survive. If you drop them throughout the year, very few will survive. So this is why we see why that very seasonal thing came about. Now, that obviously led to animals in big bunches dunging and urinating all over their own food. And no species likes to feed on their own feces, even humans. Okay, so what did that do? That led to very heavy trampling of litter onto the ground, covering soil, getting rid of that oxidizing muck by converting it to trampled litter, dung or urine. And then the land is free to grow, plants are free to grow, all the rain is free to soak in and remain in the soil, fully effective, not leading to the floods like you've just had, which is probably 2 to 3 times as bad as it should have been if your land had been healthy. Okay, so that's a very different scene. Now, when we look at these grasslands, and I'm covering some of the stuff at TED so that you can ask questions about it, here's a grassland on our place in Africa where we're really pushing the envelope and trying to see how hard we can push the production of the land. Now, we're going into 8 months of no rain there. That grass is now drying off, and all of that has got to cycle and get back on the ground before the rains come, after 8 months of no rain. Now, if we rest it, as you know, it oxidizes, so that kills the plants, kills the soil, leads to, in low rainfall, shift to desert bushes and algae and so on, in higher rainfall to more woody vegetation and noxious plants and things like that. So we can't do that. We know we can't burn it because that leads to desertification, destruction of many species, etc. And we know that no technology is capable of doing it. We've been trying technology for a long time, and strangely enough, range scientists many years ago did realize that these lands needed high disturbance, but they developed machines to do it, like the Dixon imprinter, etc. And millions of dollars were spent by governments on impacting the land with a machine to mimic the animals, and today you can find the abandoned machines and failed land reclamation with machines. Strangely enough, and this is just because we're human, when I suggested we use animals to mimic animals about nearly 50 years ago, it was like throwing a pork chop in the synagogue. And so what I've been saying for many, many years, and this is what changed me from being a person who hated livestock to realizing they're the only thing available to science. And to me, as a wildlifer and ecologist, there is no other tool available to science. And I notice that people don't like it when a scientist sticks his neck out and says, only way. I am doing it. And I'm inviting anyone, any scientist in the world, please, to hell with my ego or anything else, chop my head off. Tell me what other tool you can use. We've got a desperate problem. We should have put it on a war footing many years ago. We've got to move ahead. If there's another tool out there that some scientist in the world knows of, they have a duty to tell us what it is. So you livestock people become some of the most important people in the world. Without your livestock, we're not going to survive. Without those pastoralists that I was meeting with last week, Tuaregs from the Sahel, they are undergoing cultural genocide at the moment because of the ignorance in our policies and our educational system. And they're dying and fighting. And they are vital. Without them, we can't reverse that desertification. So we have to get this message out somehow. Now, once we realized that we had to use livestock, it presented a very great problem. This was in the 1960s when we came to that realization. How the hell were we to do it? We'd had thousands of years of mob grazing, herding animals by extremely knowledgeable people who had domesticated the animals, developed the breeds. Their entire culture is their animals. They see themselves as inseparable from their animals, much more so than we do in the Western culture. But they had created the great man-made deserts, so clearly all of that mobbing and herding and bunching them wasn't working. Then we'd had 100 years of modern range science with various grazing rotations,